Some people don't have enemies. They manufacture them. They walk into rooms already prepared for conflict. They interpret neutrality as hostility, silence as disrespect, disagreement as betrayal. And if they can't find an enemy, they create one. Because for some individuals, enemies are not accidents. They're psychological necessities. Weak people don't always look weak. Sometimes they look intense, opinionated, passionate, misunderstood. But underneath the surface, there's something fragile. An identity that can't survive without opposition. Because when you don't know who you are, it's easier to define yourself by who you're against. There's a psychological mechanism called projection. It's when someone attributes their own insecurity, aggression, or envy to someone else. Instead of admitting, "I feel inferior," the mind rewrites the script. "They're threatened by me." Instead of confronting internal doubt, they're trying to sabotage me. Instead of questioning their own competence, they're jealous. Projection protects the ego, but it also creates enemies. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people feel powerful only when they're opposed. Conflict gives them clarity. An enemy gives them structure, because without conflict, they feel invisible. There's another pattern. It's called externalization of blame. Every failure becomes someone else's fault. Every setback becomes persecution. Every criticism becomes an attack. Over time, this creates a narrative. I'm not failing, I'm being targeted. And that narrative is addictive. Because if you're being targeted, you must matter. If you have enemies, you must be important. For a weak identity, that illusion is intoxicating. History shows us something interesting. Strong leaders build systems, weak leaders build villains. Because villains unify people faster than competence does. The same pattern happens in everyday life. The coworker who claims everyone is against them. The friend who cycles through toxic relationships. The person who believes they're constantly misunderstood. At some point, the common denominator isn't coincidence. It's construction. Psychologically, creating enemies does three things. First, it simplifies the world. Life becomes binary. Us versus them. Right versus wrong. Victim versus aggressor. Complexity disappears, and complexity is uncomfortable. Second, it protects the ego. If someone dislikes you, it's not your behavior, it's their insecurity. If someone distances themselves, it's not your intensity, it's their weakness. The mind stays clean. Third, it provides identity. You are no longer just a person navigating life. You're a fighter, a rebel, a misunderstood genius surrounded by enemies. And that feels powerful. But it's artificial power. Because real strength doesn't need opposition to exist. It doesn't need tension to feel relevant. It doesn't need to scan every room for threat. Weak people are hyper-aware of status shifts. A laugh they weren't included in, a conversation they weren't invited to, a subtle disagreement. To a stable mind, these are neutral events. To a fragile one, they're signals of danger. Fragile minds don't tolerate ambiguity. They fill in gaps with suspicion. Suspicion becomes narrative. Narrative becomes belief. Belief becomes enemy. Over time, they start preemptively striking. Passive aggression, subtle insults, public call-outs, cold withdrawal. Not because they were attacked, but because they expect to be. And expectation shapes behavior. Eventually, something predictable happens. People actually begin distancing themselves. Not out of jealousy, not out of threat, but out of exhaustion. And when that distance forms, it confirms the original belief. See, they were against me. The enemy becomes self-fulfilling. This is the paradox of weakness. It creates the very hostility it fears. Strong individuals can tolerate being disliked. They can tolerate ambiguity. They can tolerate not being the center. Weak individuals cannot, because dislike feels like erasure, and erasure feels like death. So they fight ghosts. They manufacture villains. They escalate minor friction into moral battles. And the louder they become, the more isolated they grow. But here's the part most people miss. Weakness doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It shows up as constant defensiveness, as chronic sarcasm, as obsession with being right, as the inability to let things go. It shows up in people who always need the last word, because silence feels like losing. When you understand this pattern, something shifts. You stop arguing with manufactured narratives. You stop trying to prove neutrality. You stop defending yourself against imaginary hostility, because you realize you were never the enemy. You were the mirror. And mirrors are dangerous to fragile identities. So the next time someone frames you as a threat, ask yourself something simple. Did you attack them? Or did you expose something unstable? Weak people don't create enemies because they're strategic. They create enemies because they're afraid. Afraid of insignificance, afraid of irrelevance, afraid of being ordinary. And nothing threatens a fragile identity more than the possibility that no one is actually thinking about them at all. This is Lucid Code,